All right, let's go ahead and get our little characters in our game animated. So the way the animation is going to work, so if we took our hero, for example, I've got two images, and we're just going to cycle back and forth between the two images, and it'll look like the player is walking. Spike ball, same thing. I've just got two images, and if we flip back and forth, we should have kind of a rolling effect. And then our little Spike Man guy, same thing. We're just going to toggle back and forth between two images. So I'm going to move, and let's go look at the code and get started here. So the first thing I want to do is just think about, before we even deal with the enemies specifically, let's just get the logic kind of sorted out. So I'm going to make a new class, animated entity. And it is just going to extend the entity class. So any code I have in here is now borrowed, or any features that an entity has, an animated entity will have too. So in this case, it can have gravity. And I'm going to make an initializer. And it's going to take an X and a Y, but here's where it's going to go a little bit different. Rather than take a single image, what I want to do is take a list of images. So I'll make my variable images just to indicate that it's plural. And then since we are an entity, we have to make a call to super to get the entity initializer to go. So I'll just say super init X, Y. And the entity is taking a single image as an argument. So what I'm going to do is just take images 0 and just pass it on up. And forgot a dot right there. There we go. All right, so this will get so now an animated entity has everything an entity has. And then we're going to make some additional fields for it. So I passed in this image list, and I want to keep a copy of that image list. So I'll say self.images equals images. And then, so now I want to keep track of which image in the list do I want to be the one that's currently getting displayed. So I'll say self.image index, and we'll set it to 0. I'm going to make another variable called self.tix and set it equal to 0. Tix is going to just track. We're just going to increment this by 1 every single frame of our game. So this is just going to be a count of how many frames have passed since the enemy was created. And last, the self.animation speed. And I'm going to set it to 10. This is one of those take a guess and see what it looks like numbers and then adjust it right as needed. So I have no idea how well this is going to work. But what I'm thinking of here is like every 10 frames, we'll just advance to the next image in the image list. All right, that's going to be the idea. And if it's not fast enough, we'll lower this number. And if it's too fast, we'll make that number higher. And so now I'm going to do a, so let's think of the animation logic. So I'm going to make a function called def animate. And so what we're going to do is every time animate is called, so we'll do this every iteration of the game loop, we'll say self.tix plus equals 1. And then I'll check, and I'll say if self.tix, and I'll divide by the animation speed, I'll modulus by the animation speed, and see if it's equal to 0. So the animation speed is 10, and tix is increasing by 1 every frame, then the tix divided by the animation speed will be 0, like, when tix is 10, 10 divided by 10 has a remainder of 0, 20 divided by 10 has a remainder of 0, 30 divided by 10, and so on. All right, so this is going to happen after every 10 ticks. We'll get inside this conditional here. And if that's the case, we'll just say self.image equals self.images. That's the list. And we'll say, and actually, let's do something else first. We'll say self.image index plus equals 1. And then here, we'll do self.image index. All right, so what's the logic? We'll increase the ticks. If the ticks happens to be evenly divisible by the animation speed, then we'll increase the image index, and then we'll reassign the image to the next image in the image list. Right? There's one little problem in here, and that is, right, the images list is finite, and so we can't have an image index that goes past the end of the image list. So I'm just going to do a check for that first, and I'll say if self.image index is greater than or equal to the length of self.images, and we'll just reset the image index back to 0 so we can start over again at the first frame of the animation. So this is the logic of animating an entity. So now let's actually get this to work with our enemies. So I'm going to go to my enemy class, and I'm going to make it an animated entity instead, which means that it's going to have to take a list of images rather than a single image. So I'm going to change these both to plural just to indicate that it's expecting a list. And so we'll go up here now. And let's, instead of loading just individual images, I want to change each of these so a list of images is loaded. I'm going to put in some blank lines just so it's a little easier to see where I'm working. And I'll change each of these to something plural. All right. And let's start out with the spike ball. I want to make it a list, so I'm going to do a bracket, and I'll do a comma. I'm just going to copy and paste all this. And the next image is called spike ball 2, and we close out that list. Right. So now my spike ball is a list of my spike ball images is a list of 2 images. I'm going to do the same thing for Spike Man. So copy that. And it's Spike Man Walk 2. And by the way, if you have more images, simply, if you had 3 or 4 images in a list that you wanted to animate, you can make this list right here as, right, this list can be made as long as you want, and none of the rest of the code is going to have to change. My cloud, even though I only have one, since I'm just going to, all of my enemies are now meant to be animated, I am just going to take that single image and put it in a list. And so in effect, what's going to happen is, the cloud will be animated, but it's just going to keep setting the image to the same one every single time. So, all right, so that should work. And now let's go down to, let's see, our enemy is now an animated enemy, and it's expecting a list. And so I need to go into my spike ball, make that take a list, make that take a list, and make that take a list. I don't need to change anything here, right? Because all enemies are animated, which means, all the animation code got passed along. The very last thing we need to do is go to, let's see, where we're loading the level, and spike ball images, we'll do the list, spike man images, cloud images. Oh, and we have to do one more thing. We actually have to call that animate function. So in the update, I'm just going to say self.animate. Copy that here and here. And I suppose I could put it in the cloud, just for consistency, but remember, there's only one image in the list, so nothing's ever going to happen anyway. But let's just see if this works. All right. Name animation speed is not defined. I know what I did. I always forget the selfs. Animated enemy. This should be self dot. And there we go. All right, so the balls look like they are rolling. And the spike man, well, it's kind of weird, right? So let's look at this one up here, which is always facing the same direction. And I suppose what I would like him to do is, right, is turn around. So let's see if I can add a little bit more code to the spike man, right, to get it to turn around. All right, so I am going to, let's see, I am going to add, well, we're dealing with the spike man images, and I'm going to add another line in here. Initially, I think my spike man, let me check. Yeah, my spike man is walking to the right initially, so I'm going to call this spike man images right. Right, so now we know that those are the right-facing images. And what I want to do is make another list of images, which is just all of these flipped the other direction. So rather than you get into some image editing software and all that, we can actually let Pygame do it for us. So I'll make a new list called SpikeMan images and call it left. And I'm going to do something called a list comprehension. And even if you haven't done one before, don't worry about that. I think as long as you understand the purpose of the line of code, that should be good enough. And so what I'm going to do is I'm making a list, and I'm going to say, let me. I got to look this up. Okay, so it's pygame.transform.flip. I'm going off notes here. This is something I always look up, and it's going to be the image, true, false. I'll close out my function. Right. So what this is going to do, this is a function that takes an image, and the true and the false, this one means do flip it in the horizontal direction, don't flip it in the vertical direction. Okay. And so this is the general code for flipping an image. And so what I'm going to say is for image in, and we'll say spike man image is right. And so now I have two, right? So now I have two image lists here. Here's the original images, and here is another list, the exactly same length with all of the images just flipped, mirrored horizontally. Okay. And this is the only one I need to do that with because the spike ball doesn't matter which direction it's facing, and my cloud, I only have one, so that doesn't matter either. All right. So let's get into our animated entity. And what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to add another function, and I'm going to call it set image list. And in the animated enemy, I'm just going to let it do nothing basically. So I'm going to say self.images equals images. And so it's just assigning its image list to the same thing it already is. All right, and it's like, why am I doing that? You'll see kind of as I do more animation. And so I'm going to make the very first call to animate self.set image list. Right. So if I were to run this right now, nothing is going to change about the way the code works. But I've got this set image list function, which I can use as a stub. This must have misspelled transform. Transform. Okay. And SpikeMan images is not defined. Oh, and so when we make it, I've got to go down here to SpikeMan images and let's see. All my enemies are initially walking to the left, so I'll just say left. It really doesn't matter if we did right or left. You'll see that in a second. So let's make sure this just still runs the same. Images is not defined. Let's say self.aha. I keep doing this. This should be self.images. Okay, so everything works the same right now. And so real simple, what we need to do is make a set image list function that overrides this one for any kind of entity, animated entity, for which the image list changes. And so I'm going to go down to my Spike Man, and I'll just do a def set image list, and let's think of the logic, right? What we're really doing is we're just checking the velocity. So I'm going to say if self.vx is greater than 0, that means we're going to the right, then I can say self.images is equal to spikeman images right, and I'll say else, and set it to left images. And so now, every time animate gets called, right, the animate function will call the set image list, but since we're in a subclass, it will call, right, it's going to call this one instead of that default one that does like basically nothing. And so let's do this, and let's see. Spikeman images right. Did I spell it wrong? Oh, Spikeman is one word. All right, and so let's run it. And looks good. And you can watch the little Spike Man up there, and he's right, and he's turning around. One of the other things that you can do, like sometimes I think it looks like if the speed looks a little bit off, for how fast it's going, we can actually say like, well, maybe it looks like the spike ball is the speed looks right, but maybe the Spike Man looks like it's kind of moonwalking a little bit or sliding around. I can say self.animation speed is equal to 8. So I could change this I could add a self.animation speed, just do it after super for any one of your animated images. So if you don't like 10, just override it with either a faster or slower speed and see if it looks a little bit better. So let me run this. And basically, I'm just going to sit there and play with that little number until it looks like, it doesn't look like he's sliding, until it looks like he's actually walking. His legs are moving at a speed that is relative to how fast he's actually moving on the screen. All right, so I think this is a great place to stop the video. I know this one got way longer than usual, and I'll save the animating of the hero for the next video. All right, I will talk to you later. Let me know if you have any questions.